Hello and welcome to the Sana Psychological Podcast, your safe space for connection, healing, and growth. Each episode, our experienced clinicians and special guests will share strategies, stories, and resources to support your unique path to well-being. Because at Sana, your mental health matters. Welcome to another episode of the Sana Psychological Podcast. I'm your host, Paige Abbott. Today I'm joined by Megan Hanrahan to discuss Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder, or OCD, and what it actually looks like for people. Megan has been working as a therapist for 6 years and has been a registered psychologist for over 2. She is passionate about working with clients with anxiety and obsessive-compulsive disorder. She often draws from her personal experience working with both of these areas of mental health. She's here today to discuss common misconceptions about OCD and, in an upcoming episode, more about strategies for management and treatment. So, hi, Megan. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Hi, Paige. Good to be here.
Thank you. I really appreciate you being here because today we are going to be talking about obsessive-compulsive disorder, or OCD. And I honestly feel like OCD is one of the most misunderstood health conditions
Mm-hmm.
out there. I
Yeah.
hear it referred to quite often, almost like a descriptor for people. I'm so
Mm-hmm.
OCD, and often because, people might have a preference for liking things clean or liking things a certain
Mm-hmm.
way. And unfortunately, I think that does a real disservice to those who do have OCD and whose lives are being impacted by this. And that's why I'm really grateful that you're here today as an OCD specialist to give us more real talk and real information about what OCD is.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think you worded it really well. And I think it's something I'm really, really passionate about because I agree. It's so misunderstood. And I think that can be really harmful to clients and individuals who have OCD, can be really invalidating and actually quite confusing too. Because I think, I think for a lot of people with OCD, they're just starting to understand those symptoms, right? And so if they're seeing a misrepresentation of it in the media, it can be, oh, well, is that what it's supposed to look like? And it just shows up in so many different ways that, yes, I agree, it can be pretty problematic.
Why do you think it is so misunderstood?
Mm,
Do you have any personal theories on that?
yeah. Well, I've reflected on that a lot, and I think, what I've come across with clients is there's a lot of shame with OCD. There's a lot of, when people start to have intrusive thoughts or, just these obsessions surface, I don't think they want to talk about it. They don't want to express what's really going on because they're afraid of being judged, because they don't even understand it themselves, right? And so I think sometimes in the media, maybe there's some that have been more kind of normalized, or even that positive side of, oh, this is a preference and this makes me happy. And I think when it comes to some of the thoughts that can be a little bit more taboo, it's not shared, and people keep that secret. So I kind of think that could be a big part.
That's interesting. I'd never really considered that shame element.
Hmm.
However, I can totally see that being the case because
Yeah.
shame obviously leads to a lot of secrecy.
Hmm.
And that secrecy, if people aren't talking about their experiences and their feelings, then there's going to be a lot of misunderstanding. So here
Hmm.
you have the opportunity day after day to hear more about the reality of lived experience with OCD from
Mhm.
people. I'm really interested when you're working in that space with individuals. How do you explain OCD to your clients,
Mhm.
and how would you explain OCD to our listeners?
Yeah, great question. I think usually how I start with clients is just to, start from explaining that it's all about the inability to tolerate uncertainty. And that is, there's a lot of uncertainty as part of just being a person, right? Um, and then with OCD, it's much harder to sit with that. And so what ends up happening is you get caught in this cycle of trying to find the certainty. So, it would start off with, whether it's an intrusive thought, whether it's, just an obsession, a really anxiety inducing worry. And then, of course, that's going to cause you discomfort. It's going to cause you anxiety. And then we have compulsions. So, compulsions are the attempt to reduce that uncertainty, reduce the anxiety, or some people just say they're neutralizing those thoughts. And it's all about this search for I want to know, or I want to fix it, I want to solve it, right? But what we know is there's just, sometimes you can't find that certainty, right? Like, and sometimes it's just about sitting with it. And so what ends up happening is this cycle just keeps going because your brain is essentially going, oh, in order to feel this relief, um, I have to do these compulsions. And so then people just get caught in this cycle that's quite distressing.
So it's almost meant to be this fix, if you will,
Hmm.
to some of those feelings and some of that discomfort.
Yeah.
But like many fixes that our
Hmm.
minds turn to, maybe initially it might feel it provides that relief or it provides that benefit that the person's looking for.
Yeah.
But over time, it
Yeah.
starts to maybe not be as helpful or starts to have its own consequences and side effects, if you will, that
Hmm.
become quite disruptive to the person. Is that what I'm understanding?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
I've noticed a lot with some clients, it ends up, maybe it starts as one thing and then it just amplifies to the next level. Like for example, it could be hand washing, for example. So that's a really common compulsion, and it ties into the contamination OCD. And maybe it starts off as okay, I'm going to wash my hands 5 times. Right. And then, maybe that works for a bit. And, but maybe that discomfort just escalates. And then it's okay, then it's going to be 10 times. Right. And they're really just kind of trying to fix it. But then what people realize is the compulsions become problematic, right? They're interfering with your day to day. They're taking up a lot of time, and then that they can be distressing in and of themselves, right? Um, and so yeah, it's just a really tricky cycle to get out of when it
For
starts.
sure. Yeah. And I can
Hmm.
hear you describing the idea of compulsions in a bit more
Hmm.
clarity of what
Yep.
those actions can look like and how they can take on a life of their own.
Hmm.
On the obsession side,
Yeah.
obsessions often start with our thoughts. And there's
Hmm.
this idea discussed in OCD treatment community about
Hmm.
intrusive thoughts. And
Yeah.
again, this is a term I hear people just throwing out in kind of
Hmm.
everyday conversation. And
Yeah.
again, I think there might be a little bit of misunderstanding as to, in the clinical sense, what are intrusive thoughts? I'd love to
Yeah.
hear your description of that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's one of those, popular terms that gets thrown around quite a bit. And in the sense of OCD, you know when you're having an intrusive thought. It's, thoughts that just pop into your minds, and they are extremely distressing for people. The intrusive thoughts, so intrusive thoughts are something we all have, right? Everyone has experienced whether it's kind of a detailed thought or a more fleeting, temporary thought that's just, oh, what if I did something really inappropriate? Or what if I harmed someone in my life? What if I, acted on an unwanted impulse, right? So there's these thoughts that come up, and they're usually, not usually, but sometimes they can be really taboo. And it goes back to what I mentioned about the, shame piece. People have the thoughts and they, feel a lot of shame and confusion. And, like they question even who they are sometimes, right? But, with OCD, the difference here is how they react to those thoughts, right? The brain, the brain can do whatever it wants to do. It can tell you whatever it wants, right? And sometimes those thoughts look kind of funny or kind of, distressing. But when you have OCD, it feels real. It feels like you actually, maybe you are going to hurt that person. Maybe you are going to hurt yourself. And it's, can become so all consuming that it's hard to tell the difference between reality and, just what your brain is telling you, right? And so these intrusive thoughts can stick with people for hours, days, months, and sometimes years. It's just this thought that keeps nagging at you and won't leave you alone. And so that's just why this is such a distressing disorder for people. But yeah, I think it's good to clarify what they are, because I don't think people realize how intense they can be for people. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Hmm. Yeah, really good question. So, I'll go back to what I mentioned about the uncertainty piece. OCD can show up in any area where there's uncertainty. So that's why what we see is a lot of different forms of OCD. So, I've had clients inquire about, oh, do you work with this type of OCD or this type of OCD? And, what I end up saying is yes, because what we do is we treat every way it comes up the same, right? So, we think about different ways uncertainty can come up. Um, a lot of the common ones, a lot of the common ways it manifests in OCD would be, contamination. Contamination is kind of I believe it's kind of what people associate OCD with. It's very, yeah, like and on that point, yes, it is definitely an area of OCD, but it's not the only area. And so what that looks like is, what if I have germs on my hands, or what if I were to touch that thing that might have germs on it, and what if I were to get sick, or what if someone I love were to get sick, or even just what if I spread those germs. For a lot of people it looks like, there's this imagery of, okay, everything in my house is contaminated, and it's very overwhelming and distressing for people. So that, yes, that is a very common one, but like I said, it's not the only way it shows up, and people can have a lot of combinations of different types of OCD. So you might have contamination, you might not have contamination OCD. Another really common area is, like, what we've been talking about so far is harm OCD. So thoughts about, like you said, what if I cut my finger off in the kitchen, or what if I stabbed my husband, right? And they're, scary. They're scary thoughts. And then, what follows with that is some sort of compulsion to ensure that's not happening. So, like, I'm not going to go near kitchen knives, or I'm, gonna, even for some people it gets to the point of I can't even cook. And so that's kind of what the compulsion might look like there. Another really common one is relationship OCD. So, if we think about the uncertainty in relationships, there's lots of uncertainty there, right? You don't know what's going to happen in your relationship. You don't know what your partner is doing at all times of the day, right? And most of us in relationships just kind of say, yeah, that's okay. I don't know for sure what they're doing, but I have that trust, and I rely on that. But when you have OCD, that uncertainty is really hard to tolerate. So it might look like, what if my partner's cheating on me? What if I don't even love my partner? All the things that are uncertainty about relationships. And so that is actually a very common, what I've seen at least, presentation with OCD. So those are just a few examples, but there's many, many more. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what I'd say is, and I'll just share a little bit about myself personally. I haven't been diagnosed, but I do have OCD myself, and I have been through a long journey with trying to get better, trying to get the proper treatment, and it did take me some time, but I did find a treatment that really worked for me. And that is, and I think we'll talk about this in another episode. It's exposure and response prevention. And basically what I'd want people to know is that it really helped me. And I've seen it in clients, I've seen people improve. And there is a way to get better. There is a way to reduce those compulsions and live with that uncertainty. So I want people to know that there's solutions and you don't have to just live the way you're living. So that's the message.
Oh, that's amazing. That's beautiful.
Yeah,
And I
thank you.
appreciate the vulnerability to share a little bit of your personal journey and lived
Yeah,
experience. And
yeah,
it's always nice when we can speak from two places, the personal
mhm,
and the professional, and you've seen it
yep,
on both sides. So nice to
yeah,
feel that sense of hope and direction, because ultimately sometimes people can feel stuck in their mental health journey, and it's nice to know there's always a different direction to try. And even if you've tried that direction before, maybe retrying it, you never know, doing something again with who you are and where you're at today might offer that little bit of change that you're looking for. I love that.
absolutely.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your sharing. I just wanted to let
Yeah,
people know that on the Sana Psychological website, we have a section of free resources, and those are broken up into different categories. And we do have an anxiety and OCD category. So in there, you'll find resource suggestions, including some books and some apps, as well as resources that our therapists have created themselves to support people wherever they're at in their mental health journey. So we'd invite you to check those out if you're new to exploring this, or if you've been exploring this for a long time. There's different resources on there to support you. And please tune in next time. We're going to have Megan back to talk more about, as you'd said, that next step, which is
mhm,
after we have more understanding of what OCD is. The next question is always, so what do I do and where do I go with that? And so we'll be talking
mhm.
more about OCD treatment next time. But thank you so much, Megan. I really appreciated your time today.
Abs
Thank you for listening to the Sana Psychological Podcast. We're glad you joined us today. For more resources, free tools, or to book a session with our team, visit sanapsychological.com. Your mental health is our priority. Until next time, be gentle with yourself and take good care.